It started with a click, a bored afternoon, a curious mind, and a routine glance at a neighborhood he hadn't walked through in years. 13-year-old Noah Collins was scanning Google Maps from his laptop in suburban Illinois, jumping between satellite view and street view, retracing roads he and his older brother used to bike down when they were kids. Roads that had been silent ever since, because 5 years earlier, that older brother, Jacob, vanished. One moment, he was walking home from school. The next, he was gone. No signs of struggle, no eyewitnesses, no answers. The search had gone on for months. Flyers, phone calls, candlelight vigils. But eventually, like so many cases, the headlines stopped, and Jacob's name became one of thousands on a missing persons list that rarely gets updated. But Noah never forgot. He never stopped imagining his brother out there, somewhere. Never stopped believing that the right clue was waiting in plain sight. And then, one day, while exploring a random stretch of suburban street through a blurry Google Street View image, he froze, because there, sitting on a park bench near a shopping plaza miles from where Jacob had gone missing, was a teenager, same dark hair, same hooded jacket, same posture, head down, arms crossed. The image was grainy. The photo had been captured by the Google Maps car over a year ago, but to Noah, it wasn't just a person. It was Jacob. He was sure of it. His parents dismissed it at first. So did local authorities. After all, how many people looked like Jacob? The odds were slim. But Noah persisted. He saved the image, zoomed in, compared it to photos on the fridge, school portraits, even a video of Jacob laughing at his 12th birthday party. The resemblance wasn't just close, it was chilling. Reluctantly, the police opened a digital inquiry, and when they traced the location and examined the full image set, what they found didn't just reopen Jacob's case, it shook them. Because a few frames later, the boy on the bench was seen standing beside a man. Someone who looked familiar, too familiar, someone already on a list. Within days, the investigation was active again, and what followed would uncover a web of deception, misidentification, and a haunting question. What happens when technology captures a truth the world forgot to look for? This is the story of Jacob Collins, of the day he disappeared, and the day the internet helped bring him back. Jacob Collins was 13 years old when the world stopped recognizing him. It was a Thursday afternoon in early March 2015, the kind of gray, quiet day that Midwest suburbs know well. The sun hiding behind cloud cover, the trees bare, and the air holding just a whisper of spring. Jacob had just left Lincoln Middle School, the same building his younger brother Noah would later attend, the same route they used to walk together when their mom could pick them up late from work. But this time, Jacob walked home alone. He waved goodbye to friends outside the school gate, earbuds in, backpack slung lazily over one shoulder. He took the usual shortcut, a worn footpath through a wooded strip behind the church and across from the CVS. He did it every day, but that day, he never made it home. When Jacob didn't walk through the front door by 3:45 p.m., his mom, Dana, wasn't immediately concerned. Sometimes he stopped at the gas station for candy. Sometimes he lingered at the basketball court. But by 4:30, the unease was starting to claw at her. She called his phone, straight to voicemail. By 5 p.m., she was out the door, driving the route herself. She stopped by the school. Nothing. Checked the nearby park. Nothing. Called his friends. No one had seen him after he turned the corner. By 6 o'clock, the police were notified. And by nightfall, the search had begun. The first 48 hours of a missing child case are the most critical. But for Jacob, even those early hours brought no clarity. No witnesses saw him after the school gates. No traffic cameras captured him on his usual route. No one at the gas station remembered seeing him that day. The wooded path he usually took showed no signs of struggle, no dropped backpack, no phone, no trace. The police canvassed the area. Volunteers joined search parties. Helicopters were dispatched briefly over the nearby woods. Flyers went up in the school, the community center, and taped to stop signs all over the town. A tip line was set up, and leads started trickling in. A woman 2 blocks over claimed to have seen a boy matching Jacob's description near the railroad tracks, but she wasn't sure. It had been dark, and the boy had a hood up. Another tip suggested someone saw him get into a red pickup truck near the 7-Eleven. Police chased every possibility. They found the owner of the truck. It belonged to an elderly man who had no connection to Jacob. Surveillance footage from 7-Eleven showed no sign of Jacob that day. With every passing hour, the case slipped further into uncertainty. At home, Noah, only 8 years old at the time, sat on the couch in silence. He clutched Jacob's hoodie, the one he had left behind on the coat rack. His brother had promised to help him beat a level in their favorite game that night. Promised. He always kept promises. But that night, the silence was louder than any console. Dana and her husband Mark did what parents do in a nightmare. They fought to stay composed while their world was unraveling. Dana gave interviews. Mark stood beside her, fists clenched in every photo. They begged the public to help. "He's 13, Dana told reporters. "He's just a kid. He's smart, he's funny, and he wouldn't run away. Someone knows something. Please." For a while, the case stayed in the spotlight. It aired on local news stations, made the rounds in Facebook groups, was featured in a few national online publications. A small reward was offered. Police released updated sketches. Still, nothing. No body, no confirmed sightings, no communication. And then came the questions. Had Jacob been struggling at home? Had he been bullied? Was there a reason he might have run away? The family dismissed those suggestions outright. Jacob was grounded, sure, occasionally. He'd gotten in trouble for sneaking his phone into class, for staying up too late on school nights. But he wasn't troubled. He wasn't unhappy. He didn't talk about running away. And besides, if he had run away, why hadn't he taken anything? His backpack was never found. His phone was never turned back on. It was like he had been erased. The last confirmed sighting of Jacob Collins was at 3:17 p.m., standing just outside the school gates, nodding along to something in his headphones. A classmate remembered giving him a quick wave. Jacob had smiled, said something about stopping for gum, and then he was gone. The case stayed active for nearly 2 years. Investigators chased multiple theories: that Jacob had been lured away online, that he had been abducted by someone he knew, or, worst of all, that he had been taken by a passing predator with no connection to the area. But no credible evidence ever surfaced. By 2018, the police quietly moved the case to inactive status. Still open, still technically unresolved, but no longer receiving daily attention. A detective would revisit it every 6 months. Leads would still be followed. But no new searches were organized. No press conferences were held. The town moved on. But Noah never did. He started high school in the same building where Jacob had once walked the halls. Every hallway was a reminder. Every classmate felt like a pale version of the life he was supposed to have had. The space beside him at the dinner table stayed empty, and sometimes he'd catch his mom staring at that chair, too. By the time Noah turned 13, the same age Jacob had been when he vanished, he found himself doing something he never told anyone. He searched, not in the woods, not with posters, but through screens. He looked at online maps, Street View, photos from anywhere even remotely connected to their town. Not because he expected anything, but because it felt like doing something, because it helped him imagine Jacob was still out there. Until one day he saw something he couldn't unsee. A boy sitting on a bench, leaning forward, arms folded, hood up, same dark eyes, same shape of jaw, same backpack, or one that looked a lot like it. Noah zoomed in. He took a screenshot. He stared for a long time. Then, heart pounding, he ran. Dana Collins didn't move at first when Noah showed her the screenshot. It was an image she'd seen 1,000 times in her dreams. Jacob's silhouette, that posture, the slouch of his shoulders that always told her he was thinking about something too big for a kid his age. But this time, it wasn't a memory. It was an image on her son's laptop, pulled from Google Maps. She tried to steady her voice. "Where did you find this?" she asked. Noah's fingers trembled as he clicked back a few frames. It's near Oak Ridge Plaza, behind that hardware store. The street camera passed through there a year ago. That's when they took this." Dana leaned closer. The timestamp on the image was dated April 2020. The area was familiar. They'd driven by it dozens of times, never thinking twice. But the boy in the image, she wanted to say it wasn't Jacob, that it couldn't be. But she couldn't, because it looked too much like him. That night, Dana called the local police station, the same station that had opened Jacob's missing person file 5 years earlier. The dispatcher was polite but skeptical. When Dana explained the situation, there was a long pause. "You're saying your son found an image on Google Maps, and you believe it's your missing child?" "Yes," Dana said, her voice steady. "I'm not asking you to solve the case right now. I'm asking you to look." The officer on duty escalated the image to a detective on call. Within 24 hours, 2 investigators arrived at the Collins home to examine the photo firsthand. They brought a copy of Jacob's original missing person file, including school photos, facial growth projections, and personal identifiers like a small scar under his left eyebrow. When they zoomed in on the Google Maps image, they went quiet. One of them whispered, "It's close, real close." The department opened a digital trace request with Google to access the raw photo data and GPS metadata of the exact image. This took days. Then came a full request for nearby business surveillance, which proved far more helpful. A security camera from a pawn shop just around the corner had recorded partial footage from the same week the Maps image was taken. It wasn't high resolution, but it showed 2 figures, a teenager and an adult male. The boy wore a dark hoodie, matching the one in the Maps image. The man beside him was older, heavy-set, and wearing a faded blue windbreaker. Police isolated the frame. Then their jaws dropped. They knew that man. His name was Charles Chuck Dinsmore, a registered sex offender with 2 prior convictions for luring minors. He had lived less than 15 miles from the Collins home in 2015. At the time of Jacob's disappearance, Dinsmore had been questioned briefly and dismissed after providing an alibi. He claimed he had moved out of state 2 months before Jacob vanished. But now, here he was, in the same plaza Jacob was allegedly seen 5 years later. And this time, they had proof. A warrant was issued immediately. Dinsmore's listed address was a rundown RV parked on private land in a wooded area just outside of town. When law enforcement arrived, they approached cautiously. No lights were on, no movement. But when they breached the door, they found 2 people inside. One was Dinsmore, older now, disheveled, stunned. The other was a boy, thin, pale, sitting silently at the corner of a small folding table. He didn't speak when they asked for his name, but he didn't have to. A fingerprint scan confirmed it minutes later. It was Jacob. The boy who had vanished from a suburban street in 2015 had been alive this whole time, held just miles away, hidden in plain sight. The story exploded across media networks within hours. Missing teen found after 5 years, thanks to Google Maps. Brothers Sharp Eye solves cold case. People around the world couldn't believe it. A case that had gone cold reignited not by technology alone, but by a child's unshakable belief that his brother was still out there. When Dana finally saw Jacob again, it wasn't the joyful reunion anyone might imagine. He didn't run to her. He didn't cry. He just looked up, quietly, and said, "I knew you'd still be looking." Doctors said Jacob was underweight, dehydrated, and had signs of psychological trauma. But he was alive. He told police very little at first. The only clear detail he gave was that he had been walking home the day he vanished when a man pulled over, said his mom had sent him to pick Jacob up. The man knew Jacob's name, knew his school. Jacob hesitated, but the man offered proof, a detail only someone close to the family would know. Jacob got in the car, and the next thing he remembered was waking up in a room with no windows. Over the years, Jacob said, he'd been moved a few times, kept indoors, isolated, sometimes under different names when Dinsmore traveled. But by 2020, the routine had become looser. Dinsmore believed the case had been forgotten. He allowed limited outings, like walks through the plaza. That's when the Google Maps car passed, and Jacob sat still on that bench, watching it go by. A small part of him wondered if anyone would see. Someone did. His brother. In every missing persons case, there's a moment when urgency fades. When the media moves on, the community's attention drifts, and the silence gets heavier than the unanswered questions. For the Collins family, that moment came sometime in late 2016, almost 2 years after Jacob vanished. They still searched, still handed out flyers, still checked with investigators every few weeks. But behind the brave front Dana put on during press interviews and the measured tone Mark tried to maintain for his younger son, there was a quiet shift no one wanted to speak aloud. Hope was turning into grief. The police investigation, once relentless, had slowed to a crawl. Every lead they received was exhausted within days. A boy in Cleveland matching Jacob's description turned out to be someone else. An anonymous call from a woman claiming she saw a suspicious man with a boy at a bus stop was untraceable and vague. Forensic analysis of Jacob's school-issued tablet and email accounts revealed nothing unusual. The truth? There was no digital trail, no ransom, no social media pings, no GPS. The detective assigned to the case at the time, Marla Jennings, had worked missing child cases before. But this one stayed with her, not just because of the age or the circumstances, but because of how absolutely Jacob seemed to disappear. It was like trying to trace fog, she said in a later interview. He was there, and then he wasn't. No signal, no witness, no disruption. He just evaporated. She didn't give up. But as the years passed and budgets shifted, even the department had to prioritize newer cases. By early 2018, the file was moved to inactive status. That didn't mean it was closed, just that unless something new came in, it wasn't being actively worked. No more search parties, no more pressers, just a thin manila folder placed in a drawer that held dozens of others like it. Dana didn't speak publicly about that transition, but at home, Noah remembered hearing the sound of her tearing the paper flyers from the refrigerator one by one. No yelling, no crying, just the sound of tape coming off metal. For Noah, those years were more than quiet. They were formative and hollow. He grew older in a house that seemed to freeze in time. His birthday parties got smaller. Family vacations stopped. Holidays felt like forced attempts at normalcy. But what Noah remembered most wasn't what was missing. It was what stayed. His mother still set a second plate at dinner for over a year, still bought Jacob a Christmas gift, wrapped it, labeled it, and left it unopened under the tree. She never explained why. She didn't have to. Grief has its own rituals. Online, Jacob's disappearance faded into the ever-expanding noise of missing persons forums, Reddit AMAs, and archived true crime threads. At one point in 2019, a post about his case briefly gained traction when an amateur sleuth on WebSleuths claimed Jacob might have been trafficked out of state. The theory: Jacob had been selected by someone familiar with his route and schedule, possibly a known offender with prior access to school records or family information. The evidence? Circumstantial at best, but the idea gained some attention after another boy in the state of Missouri went missing under strangely similar circumstances. Nothing came of it, and yet it left a scar. One more possible horror layered onto a story already thick with questions. In early 2020, just before the pandemic cast a new kind of silence across the country, Dana wrote a letter. She didn't send it. She folded it and placed it inside a shoebox with Jacob's old action figures and the last birthday card he'd ever received. The letter read, "If you're still out there, I need you to know I never stopped. Not really. There's a part of me that still sets the table, that still opens your window a crack, that listens when the house creaks and thinks maybe it's you. I can't stop, Jacob, because if I do, it means I've let go. And I don't know how to do that. I'm your mom. Letting go isn't in the job description. It was never meant to be public." But years later, when Dana read it aloud at a victim support conference, not a single person in the room remained dry-eyed. In the background, Charles Dinsmore, the man who would eventually be exposed, had blended back into society under the radar. He'd slipped through cracks in the system after serving reduced time for previous offenses, listed a new residence under a relative's name, and moved into a battered RV on a neglected plot of land outside city limits. He rarely went into town. He used cash for everything, had no social media, and thanks to outdated record-keeping systems, his parole check-ins eventually lapsed unnoticed. It wasn't a masterful evasion. It was the system doing what it often does, forgetting. And while the world forgot, Jacob remained out of sight. Noah, by now approaching high school, had grown into the kind of boy who didn't talk much. Not about the case, not about the years without his brother, and certainly not about the guilt he sometimes carried for still having a life while Jacob didn't. But he developed a habit. He searched, not obsessively, not like the forums did, but when he was alone or couldn't sleep, he'd scroll Google Maps, not in the town where Jacob had vanished, but in nearby neighborhoods, side streets, commercial zones, always looking for faces, for silhouettes, for a glitch in the digital landscape that might show him something the real world had refused to. He told no one, not until that one day, the day he saw a boy on a bench near Oak Ridge Plaza, frozen in time by the Google Maps camera. And somehow he just knew. The moment Noah showed his mom that Google Maps image, the boy on the bench near Oak Ridge Plaza, a 5-year freeze cracked wide open. It had started as a quiet obsession, something he didn't tell anyone about. Not because it was a secret, but because it was sacred. Looking for Jacob had become a kind of ritual, one that he wasn't ready to explain to people who might laugh or tell him to move on. But that image changed everything. After police confirmed the resemblance and then connected the man in the photo to Charles Dinsmore, the case caught fire. Not just in Illinois, but across the country. The original detective, Marla Jennings, was brought back into the investigation as a consultant. She later admitted in a press interview, "When I saw the surveillance photo from the pawn shop of Dinsmore and that boy walking out of frame, I felt like I'd been punched because I had dismissed him in 2015. His alibi held up back then, and yet there he was. It was the first time in her career that a cold case she'd worked had reversed course. Not from a tip or DNA or a confession, but from Google Maps. And a little brother who refused to stop looking. The FBI joined the reopened investigation and began piecing together a fuller timeline of Dinsmore's life post, 2015. They found that after his last known residence, he'd purchased a used RV in cash and lived largely off-grid. He took short, local labor gigs under aliases. He frequented certain small business areas, including Oak Ridge Plaza, where cash payments and no questions asked were the norm. Agents also uncovered something else. Dinsmore had been in contact with other individuals through darknet forums. They were vague, encrypted, and incomplete, but enough to suggest he wasn't acting entirely alone. Investigators suspected he was involved in a small, insular trafficking ring, one where the victims weren't moved far, but instead hidden in plain sight, often disguised or conditioned to avoid attention. What Jacob endured during those years remains unclear, and deliberately so. At the request of trauma specialists and child psychologists, authorities released only limited details. What they confirmed was that Jacob had been kept in isolation for long stretches, given minimal education, monitored constantly, and likely threatened into obedience. He wasn't just lost, he was silenced. In interviews, Dana Collins refused to let the media sensationalize Jacob's trauma. "He's not a ghost story," she said firmly. "He's not the twist in your documentary. He's a boy, my son. He came back from something unthinkable, and he's still here. That's what matters." She and her husband began focusing on Jacob's healing, limiting public appearances, and granting only one in-depth interview to a trusted journalist. In that interview, Dana shared a moment from the first week Jacob was home. He didn't talk at first. He just sat with Noah on the floor of his room. They didn't say much, just sat. Then, after maybe an hour, Jacob leaned over and asked, "Do you still play that game?" And Noah just nodded, handed him the controller, and they started playing like nothing had happened, like 5 years hadn't gone by, like the world hadn't changed. In many ways, the world had changed. Jacob's case sparked national conversation about missing children, digital clues, and the limitations of traditional investigation methods. Several senators used his story to push for increased funding toward technology-assisted investigations, specifically requesting that companies like Google be allowed to respond more quickly to emergency location and identity verification requests. In fact, one of the bills proposed was called the Collins Amendment, a clause advocating for law enforcement access to metadata from digital map services in suspected missing person cases, if a match is identified by family. Though controversial in some civil liberties circles, the bill drew widespread support after Jacob's story went public. It passed in 2022. Meanwhile, the online world that had once briefly forgotten Jacob now embraced him with viral energy. His story was posted to Reddit, picked up by YouTube true crime creators, and even dramatized in a podcast episode that charted in the top 10. But the Collins family avoided the spotlight. They were grateful for the awareness, but careful about protecting Jacob's identity and safety. Dana explained in a public statement, "We don't want Jacob to be a symbol. We want him to be a kid, to go to school, to learn, to laugh, to sleep through the night without checking the locks 5 times. Noah, now a quiet but observant teenager, found himself getting letters from other siblings of missing children. Kids who wrote to say, "Thank you for not giving up," or "You made me want to try again." He never saw himself as brave. "I just saw something," he said. "That's all. And I knew." But others didn't agree. He was interviewed for a national campaign promoting awareness of tech-based clues in unsolved cases. He even spoke at a youth conference briefly about how the smallest thing, a blurry image on a screen, can change the course of a life. "I looked, and I saw my brother. I think if you love someone enough, your brain just knows. You don't need high def or proof. You just know." And perhaps that's what makes Jacob's case so haunting and so human. It wasn't solved by a miracle or a confession or a lucky break. It was solved by a brother who missed his best friend. and by a photograph that the world almost didn't notice. In the early stages of Jacob's return, investigators had one job: to reconstruct what had happened, not just for the sake of justice, but to understand how a child could vanish and remain hidden for 5 years within miles of his home, in a world saturated with surveillance, social media, and connection. The answer wasn't simple, because the story Jacob began to tell was more than a timeline. It was a map of control. In the first few days after he was rescued, Jacob barely spoke. His voice came out as a whisper, his eyes often fixed on something just beyond the room. Psychologists who worked with recovered trauma victims knew the signs. Jacob hadn't just been held, he had been conditioned. Slowly, through art therapy and nonverbal expression, the story began to take shape. Jacob remembered being taken from the sidewalk behind his school, the same shortcut he walked every day. He said a man in a car stopped near the woods, said he was sent by his mom, even mentioned her name. Jacob hesitated, but the man knew something else, the name of his brother's teacher. Something private. That detail, small, seemingly innocent, tipped the scale. Jacob got in. From there, the world went dark. He was moved quickly. The first few days were a blur of back roads, windowless rooms, and silence. Jacob was told he'd never see his family again, that no one was looking, that he'd been given up. At first, he fought back. He tried to escape, but each time the consequences became worse. Not physical, not in the way people assume, but psychological. Sleep deprivation, isolation, removal of basic comfort, constant reminders that no one was coming. And slowly, as with many victims in long-term abductions, Jacob adapted. He complied, not because he believed the lies, but because it was the only way to survive them. Investigators brought in trauma-informed professionals who had worked on similar cases, J.C. Dugard, Elizabeth Smart, to compare behavioral patterns. And what they found was terrifying. Jacob's captor, Charles Dinsmore, had designed a system built not on chains or cages, but on routine, manipulation, and control. He kept Jacob in an RV outfitted with blackout curtains, a padlocked fridge, and a rotating series of false identities. Sometimes Jacob was Eli, sometimes Ben. On rare occasions when they left the RV, Jacob was warned to speak only if spoken to, and even then, only using the made-up name. One of the most chilling discoveries came from Jacob's own drawings, rough sketches of a calendar, not in dates, but in color-coded moods. Yellow meant safe. Red meant silence. Blue meant questions weren't allowed. He had internalized a system no child should ever have to learn. Law enforcement executed a full search of the RV and surrounding area. What they found confirmed Jacob's story. There were locks on the inside of cabinet doors. The windows had been sealed from the outside with heavy-duty insulation. 2 fake IDs were found in a drawer with Jacob's photo but different names. Even more disturbing, journals written by Dinsmore himself. In nearly incoherent handwriting, he documented his philosophy, that society had failed by saving them, and the world would never miss a few quiet ones. Investigators stopped reading after that. The prosecution built its case methodically. They charged Dinsmore with kidnapping, unlawful restraint, child endangerment, and multiple federal offenses. But there was something deeper, they suspected, that Dinsmore wasn't alone. In encrypted communications pulled from a hidden laptop drive, agents found references to a forum, long since deleted, where child trafficking was discussed using coded language. Jacob mentioned hearing voices on the phone, people Dinsmore called buyers or visitors, though no such visits occurred while Jacob was with him. Still, the suggestion was enough to trigger a broader federal investigation, one that remains sealed to this day. Back in his hometown, Jacob struggled with reintegration. He was older now, nearly 18, but had missed 5 years of school, life, growth. His voice sounded different. His body had changed, and the house he returned to felt like a museum of who he used to be. Noah tried to bridge the gap. At first he overcompensated, always at Jacob's side, always asking if he needed anything. But eventually they found their rhythm. "We weren't the same," Noah said once, "but we weren't strangers either. It was like picking up a book you started years ago. You just find the page again." The town responded with cautious celebration. Some neighbors held a vigil, others sent food. For weeks, the family's mailbox overflowed with cards, many from people they'd never met. But not all reactions were simple. A few older classmates, now adults, found it difficult to engage with Jacob. He had missed so much: prom, sports, awkward teenage milestones, and some didn't know how to include him. Others treated him like a symbol, a story, a headline come to life. Jacob noticed. "It's weird," he told a counselor. "People are glad I'm back, but they don't really know how to talk to me. I don't know how to talk to them either." In a quiet courtroom 6 months later, Jacob testified against Dinsmore. He wore a simple suit, sat straight, and when asked if he recognized the man who took him, he pointed without hesitation. Then he looked away. The courtroom was silent as Jacob described his first week in captivity. How Dinsmore spoke softly, acted like a friend, promised things would be okay. How quickly that act vanished. How Dinsmore stripped away his name, his voice, his sense of safety. He said one thing that struck the jury hardest. "He didn't hit me. Not once. But he made me disappear. That's worse, because I started to believe I wasn't real anymore." Dinsmore showed no reaction. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The sentencing brought a conclusion to the legal chapter of Jacob's story, but in truth, it was just the beginning of something far more complicated: recovery, identity, and what it meant to live a life reclaimed after years stolen in the shadows. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered, waiting for a statement. Dana stepped forward, her hands steady, but her voice full of quiet power. "We got justice today, but justice isn't a cure. We don't walk out of here and go back to how things were, because Jacob's gone through something most of us will never understand. So today, we don't celebrate. We just breathe. That's enough." She paused, then added, "And we remember that he is not what was done to him. He is who he chooses to become after." Jacob chose silence that day. He declined interviews, didn't want cameras in his face. Instead, he walked out of the courthouse with his brother beside him, the two of them in quiet step, as if they had never stopped walking together in the first place. The months that followed were a whirlwind, not of chaos, but of quiet repair. Jacob began therapy sessions twice a week. Specialized support from trauma professionals helped him begin to unravel the internal world he'd built while he was away, a world structured by fear, patterns, and survival. He had to relearn how to speak freely, how to ask questions without fearing punishment, how to accept kindness without bracing for consequences, and most of all, how to feel safe in a space that wasn't controlled by anyone but him. It was slow, but it was working. At home, Noah watched his brother evolve in small, beautiful ways. One day, Jacob chose his own clothes instead of asking what to wear. Another, he asked to go for a walk alone, just to the corner and back. Another time, he laughed at a joke Noah made, a real laugh. Noah later told a counselor, "That's when I knew he was still in there, like the old Jacob hadn't disappeared, just gone quiet. But he was coming back." They began doing things together again, playing games, watching movies, even helping each other with schoolwork. Jacob started taking online courses to catch up. He loved history, said it made him feel like time hadn't just happened to him, that he could learn it, understand it, even write his own place into it. He wasn't interested in becoming a public figure, but he did agree to one interview, a written Q&A, carefully reviewed, no cameras. In it, he was asked, "What do you wish people understood about kids who go missing and then come back?" His answer was simple. "We don't want to be saved and forgotten. We want to live." Law enforcement used the success of Jacob's case to implement new technology strategies in cold case units across the country. Several precincts adopted what came to be known as the Jacob Protocol, which encouraged families of the missing to review public visual data like Google Maps, traffic cams, and satellite imagery, and report any potential facial matches. It wasn't a perfect system, but it gave families a tool. It gave hope structure. Google, responding to the case's viral attention, released a statement acknowledging that while their tools were never meant to solve crimes, they were deeply humbled to know our platform played a role in reuniting a family. They offered to fund a new nonprofit. Dana declined. "We don't want to brand what happened to us. We just want to keep helping in our own way." That own way came in the form of a grassroots support network, Still Seen. Launched by Dana, Noah, and a small team of advocates, the initiative helps families of the missing navigate the emotional limbo that comes with long-term disappearances. It offers therapy resources, training on using open-source tools to search for clues, and a 24/7 peer-led hotline. Their tagline? "Gone doesn't mean invisible." Within a year, Still Seen helped bring closure to 3 other cold cases, 2 reunifications, and 1 confirmed identification of remains. Each case brought its own storm of emotions, but each reminded people that answers don't always come with a loud bang. Sometimes they come pixel by pixel. In 2023, Jacob quietly earned his GED. He didn't attend a ceremony, but at home, his family threw a small dinner, just them. When his mom handed him the diploma, she said, "You finished something they tried to stop." He nodded. "I'm not done finishing things." Later that night, Jacob told Noah he was thinking about writing. Maybe stories, maybe about kids like him, ones who got lost, but not forever. "If I ever put it all down," he said, "I want people to know it didn't end in a room. It kept going. I kept going." There were still tough days. Jacob had flashbacks, panic attacks, nights when he couldn't sleep unless every window was locked 3 times. There were moments when a certain voice or sound could freeze him mid-step. But there were also good days, days when he played basketball with Noah, days when he visited his grandmother without needing to be told where they were going, days when he smiled and didn't flinch. Progress, Dana learned, isn't always visible from the outside, but from inside a home that's seen loss, every quiet laugh is a revolution. Perhaps the most striking thing about the revelation in Jacob's story is that it didn't come from a twist of fate or a high-tech forensic breakthrough. It came from attention, from a brother who paid attention, from a family who refused to stop hoping, and from a glitchy, grainy photo. Proof that even in the blur of everyday life, truth waits to be seen. There is no blueprint for what happens after a missing child comes home. No step-by-step guide for how to heal, how to reconnect, how to reclaim years lost to fear. For the Collins family, the return of Jacob was both the end of their worst nightmare and the beginning of an entirely different one. Not the nightmare of loss, but the long, slow awakening from it. In the first few months after the trial, Jacob withdrew again. At first, everyone thought it was a relapse, trauma pulling him back into himself. But therapists helped Dana and Mark understand that what Jacob was doing wasn't retreating. He was processing. For 5 years, he hadn't been allowed to control anything, not what he ate, where he slept, when he could speak, or even who he could be. Now, with all that freedom suddenly returned, he needed time to figure out who Jacob really was. "He didn't need us to guide him," Dana said. "He needed us to stand beside him and let him walk." So they did. Jacob took small steps. He set his own schedule. He cooked meals with Noah. He planted flowers in the backyard, his own project, no supervision. He started writing in a journal, and slowly, with each tiny act of agency, he started feeling more like a person again. Not a survivor, not a symbol, just Jacob. Still there were moments that stung, running into old classmates at the grocery store, kids who had grown taller, deeper voices, jobs, driver's licenses, kids who were now adults. Jacob would smile politely, but later at home, he would sit in silence, sometimes for hours. "I feel like I paused, and the world didn't," he told Noah once. "I don't know how to catch up. I don't even know where I am." Noah didn't offer advice. He just sat next to him and said, "You're here." That's where we start. Outside the walls of the Collins home, the world kept watching. Jacob's story became the subject of countless articles, panel discussions, advocacy summits. News anchors framed it as a rare miracle. Bloggers called it a warning. Social media turned it into a case study of modern awareness and technological power. But inside their home, the Collins family didn't want miracle status. They wanted space. So they politely declined most interviews. They ignored book offers. They refused to sell the rights to any studio, even the ones who came with seven-figure deals. "This story belongs to Jacob," Mark said, "and Jacob's not for sale." Still Seen, the nonprofit Dana helped launch, grew steadily and within 18 months had branches in 5 states. They offered training seminars for local law enforcement on how to use open-source intelligence in missing persons investigations, and created digital kits for families to help them organize and present visual clues effectively. But the real heart of the program was something simpler: connection. Monthly support circles, held online and in person, gave families a place to grieve, to hope, and to talk to people who actually understood what it meant to wait. People who knew the ache of birthdays missed, the horror of an empty room, and the guilt of wondering if you've done enough. Dana often led the meetings quietly. She'd listen more than she spoke. Sometimes she would simply say, "Your child isn't gone. They're just not home yet." It became Still Seen's unofficial motto. Jacob, meanwhile, continued his own version of advocacy. He never gave speeches, he didn't appear in documentaries, but he began writing, not just journaling, but short stories, fictionalized accounts of boys who disappear and find their way home. He called it Rewriting the Ending. In one story, a boy escapes captivity through a secret message carved into a tree. In another, a girl sends her location to her sibling by folding a note into a paper plane and flying it through a crack in the wall. He never confirmed whether those elements came from his own experience. He didn't need to. The act of writing was the act of control. Therapists warned that trauma doesn't disappear. It evolves. Some days would feel normal. Others would feel like stepping on a live wire. And they were right. There were days Jacob wouldn't leave the house, days when a car backfiring made him flinch, days when he couldn't bear to see old photos, because they reminded him of everything he missed. But there were also days of laughter, days of real joy. The first time he rode a bike again, he was nervous. He wobbled, lost balance, cursed under his breath. But after a few blocks, he found his rhythm. And when he came home, he said, "I remembered. I didn't think I would, but I did." Mark clapped him on the back and said, "It's all still there, kid. You didn't lose it. You just stored it for later." One evening, sitting on the porch with Noah, Jacob asked a question that surprised them both. "Do you ever wish I hadn't come back?" Noah looked at him, stunned. "What? I mean, I'm not who I used to be. You guys had to adjust. I brought all this stuff with me. What if things were easier without it?" Noah was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "No, things weren't easier. They were quieter and empty. You're not a burden, Jacob. You're the reason we kept going." Jacob didn't respond, but his eyes welled up, and that night He slept through without a nightmare for the first time in weeks. In a journal entry dated exactly 1 year after his return, Jacob wrote, "I'm not trying to get back to who I was. I don't think that version of me exists anymore. I'm trying to figure out who I get to be now. And maybe that's even better." Jacob's quiet return to life wasn't defined by one grand moment of triumph. There was no celebratory banner, no speech, no viral social media post that captured the full scope of what it meant to rebuild a soul. It happened in tiny fragments, stitched slowly together through ordinary moments that felt extraordinary in context. He didn't want to move on. He wanted to move forward. And there's a difference. The media lost interest after a while. The headlines faded, as they always do, and the world latched onto newer mysteries, fresher tragedies. But for the Collins family, the story never ended. It simply shifted into a different kind of chapter, a private one. Jacob found healing not in the loudness of the world, but in quiet rituals. He baked bread. He started running. He read books about philosophy and kept a notepad by his bed to jot down strange dreams he couldn't quite explain. He told his therapist that it helped him make sense of thoughts that didn't have words. Sometimes he'd ask Dana if she remembered little things from before, like the red cereal bowl he used to eat from, or the time he broke a lamp trying to catch a fly. These memories were touchstones, proof that he existed before the silence, proof that he was more than the years he lost. Dana always answered, always smiled, always remembered. "You didn't disappear from us," she said once. "You just went somewhere we couldn't follow, but we kept your place ready." At school, Jacob faced a new challenge: time. Everyone his age had aged out of high school. Most had part-time jobs or college plans. Jacob was technically an adult now, but educationally still catching up. At first, he tried to keep up. He enrolled in online classes and pushed himself to study late into the night. But after a panic attack triggered by a timed exam, his counselor asked him something simple. "Do you want to do this now, or do you feel like you have to?" Jacob blinked, then admitted, "I don't know." So he took a break, started auditing classes instead, attended small group workshops, creative writing labs. He found that when there was no pressure to perform, his mind worked better, clearer, more focused. He said the thoughts stopped racing to catch up with the calendar. Meanwhile, Noah thrived in ways he hadn't before. The anxiety that had clung to him for so many years began to loosen. He joined a local filmmaking club and made a short documentary about digital evidence in cold cases, using Jacob's story as a blueprint, though never showing his face. It won a local competition. When asked why he made the film, Noah answered, "Because most people wait until the story's over to start listening. I wanted to make something that listens while the story is still happening." The Collins family grew stronger, but not in the tidy, linear way that movies often portray. They fought sometimes. Jacob had flashbacks. Dana wrestled with guilt. Mark struggled to reconnect emotionally after years of holding it together became his survival mechanism. There were tears, slammed doors, silent dinners, but there was also grace. They gave each other room to hurt, space to breathe, permission to not have it all figured out. In a family session, Dana once said, "We went through the unimaginable, so it makes sense that healing wouldn't look like anything we've ever seen before." The therapist nodded. "That's exactly it." 2 years after Jacob came home, a memorial sculpture was unveiled at Lincoln Middle School. A simple bronze bench inscribed with the words, "For those who were missing and those who never stopped looking." The idea had come from students, kids who had grown up hearing about Jacob, then watched the news with wide eyes when he returned. They wanted to honor not just him, but the quiet bravery of families who kept hope alive long after the world moved on. Jacob didn't attend the ceremony, but he visited the bench later, alone, and sat for an hour. He left a folded note beneath it. He never told anyone what it said. In the years that followed, Jacob's story became a quiet legend, not a spectacle, not a cautionary tale, but a beacon, a story about faith, family, technology, trauma, and the unimaginable power of memory. At still-seen events, Dana would sometimes close her talks with this: "The world is loud. It's easy for the quiet ones to get lost in it, but if you pay attention, really pay attention, you'll see the ones who've been missing. They're still out there. We just have to keep looking." Noah graduated high school with honors and got accepted into a digital forensics program. His stated reason on the application: "I believe a blurry image can hold more truth than 1,000 interviews." Jacob, now in his early 20s, is considering becoming a writer full-time, not of memoirs, but of fiction, because, as he puts it, "It's easier to be honest in stories that aren't mine. But sometimes, if I do it right, you'll know it's me anyway." He still goes to therapy, still has bad days, but he's found something more powerful than the absence that once defined him. He's found presence. If you ask the Collins family today what they wish people understood, they won't talk about the case or the crime. They'll talk about the boy who came home, and how healing isn't a return, it's a reimagining, a decision to build something entirely new from the fragments of what was taken. And Jacob? He's still building, one day at a time. Some stories don't end with a door closing or a final revelation. Some stories breathe, they evolve, they linger, not because they refuse to be resolved, but because they leave something with us long after the last chapter is told. Jacob Collins's story is one of those. What began as a routine walk home in 2015 became a 5-year void. What was once a missing child case, quietly tucked into the cold files, became a national example of resilience, of persistence, and of the extraordinary power of paying attention. But above all, it's a story about connection, the kind that doesn't break even after time, distance, and silence try to tear it apart. It's about a little brother who refused to stop searching, about a mother who kept a room exactly as it was, just in case, about a boy who lost his name and voice, but never fully lost his sense of being loved, even if he couldn't say it out loud. When Noah looked at that blurry Google Maps image, he saw something most people would have overlooked: a boy on a bench, still, quiet, alone, but in that stillness, he recognized his brother. And that changed everything. Because sometimes technology doesn't just show us roads and rooftops. Sometimes it reveals ghosts still waiting to be seen. Sometimes a pixel is all it takes to pull someone back from the edge of being forgotten. So maybe the lesson here isn't just about Jacob. Maybe it's about how we look at the world. How often we scroll past a face, a shadow, a detail that could be someone's entire life. Maybe it's about listening when the noise fades, when the stories stop trending, and asking, who's still missing? Who still matters? Because gone doesn't mean forgotten, and missing doesn't mean invisible. To anyone watching this, I leave you with this thought. If someone you loved disappeared, how long would you search? Would it be days, months, years? Would you know when to stop? Or would you be like Noah? Would you keep looking, even when everyone else had stopped paying attention? Let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts, your questions, your stories, and if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's waiting, hoping, wondering, share this with them too. Because sometimes the only thing more powerful than finding the truth is refusing to stop looking for it. If you appreciated this story, consider subscribing for more true mystery documentaries. We bring you real cases, emotional journeys, and the quiet strength of people who refuse to give up. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and never stop seeing the ones the world tries to forget.